Hey everyone, I'm Andy Taylor, VP of Research at Tenuity, and thank you so much, Poppy, for all that great information. I will admit, LinkedIn's one of those platforms that definitely I haven't gotten to play with as much, so super informative and really helpful. Today, I'd like to speak to you guys about, I'm going to get to it, what Q4 2022 taught us about the year ahead. And obviously Q4 every year is a bit different, and certainly there's some seasonality at play that can make it very different from the rest of the year. But I think this Q4 in particular, we had a lot of reason to um, take some learnings away from it and allow that to impact how we think about 2023. And so today I'm going to walk through some post-pandemic shifts, as well as holiday season insights, and then touch on the rise of Performance Max and how that's been doing for advertisers, and then finish up with some commentary on what I think the AI search impact will be. Obviously a big topic in our industry lately, so I wanted to touch on that as well. But before I dive into that, a little bit about me. It's actually been more than 3 years since I've spoken at an outside conference. Pandemic does wild things to everyone, so hope everyone's good out there. But yeah, it's been a while, so wouldn't blame me if you have no idea who I am. But again, Andy Taylor, VP of Research at Tenuity, and in that role, I'm responsible for keeping tabs on all of the different trends that are impacting our advertisers across more than $3 billion in ad spend under management, from Google Search to Amazon to Facebook to streaming, across all channels and platforms. Outside of that, in terms of big life events over the last 3 years, me and my wife just bought our first house in the middle of the pandemic, so that's been a fun project. I'm definitely not as handy as some folks out there, but luckily I have a really talented father-in-law who's helped us do stuff like put up a fence, which is way more challenging than you would guess. My wife's there in the middle. She's pretty awesome. Like to travel and eat good food with her. And then our pup Polyester is over there on the right. He unfortunately had to have a couple teeth pulled last week, so we just got him out of the cone yesterday. So he's feeling pretty footloose and fancy free today. So yeah, good news on the Polyester front. And so with that, I will dive into post-pandemic shifts. And I want to start off with something that's probably fairly obvious to everyone, and that's that brick and mortar has returned to the forefront of a lot of ad interactions. As you can see from this chart, looking at growth relative to 2019 of get location details clicks, which are clicks attributed to ads featured directly on Google Maps, or largely attributed to ads featured directly on Google Maps. Back in April 2020, we saw nearly a 100% year-over-year decline in those ad clicks as folks really buttoned up their behaviors and stopped moving around so much and going to physical stores. That then recovered throughout the year, and by the end of the year was only down about 7% compared to December 2019. Now, looking at 2021, for most of the year, we were above 2019 levels in terms of those get location detail clicks, as folks, were obviously getting vaccinated in the U.S. and felt more comfortable heading out to brick and mortar stores. But we still saw a decline towards the end of the year. And in December, we ended 11% below where we were in 2019 in terms of get location details clicks. And at the time, that made a lot of sense to us. I mean, after all, there were a lot of COVID variant strains that were really popping up and spreading quickly. And so it made sense to us that, that might have impacted folks' willingness to seek out new brick and mortar businesses to frequent, during that time. And looking at 2022 trends, it seemed like that was probably the end of that conversation, as we did see it recover pretty quickly in Q2 of 2022, and peak at 50% above 2019 levels in June. And so it really felt like folks had kind of moved past the phase of being worried about those variant strains. But then fast forward to the end of 2022, and we once again saw that growth slide, where we were only about 11% above 2019 levels in December of 2022. And so, while it is the case that obviously we're in a different state as it pertains to the danger of the virus and the level of mass vaccinations, and how people perceive the virus, it is still the case that if you're exposed to COVID or test positive, you're forced to forego opportunities to hang out with friends and family. And obviously, in November and December, a lot of folks are planning big group gatherings that they don't want to miss out on. And so I think as long as it's still the case that there are, real consequences to testing positive with COVID, even if it's not as scary of a health problem as it maybe once was, it's still probably going to continue impacting people's behavior. And so, while I labeled this section post-pandemic shifts, the pandemic is still weighing on people's choices, particularly around those key times. So, just something to keep in mind this coming year. Obviously brick and mortar is back, and so if you have uh, a presence in brick and mortar stores, then you need to be valuing that traffic accordingly. But also understand that there might also be some seasonality with regards to how likely people are to head to brick and mortar stores. If it continues to be the case that folks have to batten down the hatches and restrict their movement upon being exposed to it. Now, taking a look at a different post-pandemic shift, I think a big topic of discussion for many advertisers has been paid search ad pricing. And as you can see from this chart, looking at Tenuity advertiser data, we just saw the slowest year-over-year CPC growth since way back in Q3 2020, with just 2% increase in cost per click. And certainly what pops out in this chart is the massive growth that we observed in 2021, as especially in Q2, and we saw 35% plus CPC growth year over year. That huge increase that we saw in 2021 was largely a correction from what we saw in 2020. As way back in 2020, there were obviously a lot of advertisers who were forced to limit their advertising more than they would have otherwise done so because of inventory and fulfillment constraints. And obviously, the biggest example of this would be Amazon, who was forced to pause both their text and shopping ads for 12 straight weeks in the early days of the pandemic to get a handle on all of the demand that they were seeing online as folks turned heavily to e-commerce. And so that really thinned out ad auctions way back in 2020 for a couple of quarters there, and then we really started to see that recover towards the end of the year. And obviously some brands still had some of those inventory and fulfillment issues in 2021. Supply chain was still a big topic of concern for some folks, but by and large ad auctions had more or less recovered to be fully competitive by 2021. And so we saw those huge increases, and then ever since then we've kind of been drifting steadily back towards more of a normal state of affairs when it comes to ad pricing trends. And moving forward, I think we can expect just a more normal cadence of CPC rising and falling at more normal levels in those like mid to low single digits, typically. And for the most part, those increases or decreases should happen as a result of the expected value of ad clicks. And I think a good example of this is if we look over at the Amazon sponsored product side of things, where if you're not familiar with Amazon sponsored products, they're effectively a paid search format where advertisers pay to promote their products directly in Amazon results. And as you can see from this chart, we saw an 8% decline year over year in cost per click. And while many might look at that and say, oh man, that's awesome, it means ROI must be improving, that's great. That's not really the case, and to show that, you can kind of take a look at how the spend and sales growth numbers, those two lines are basically right on top of each other over the course of the last 4 quarters. And in Q4, we saw a 17% increase in spend and a 16% increase in sales. So return on ad spend stayed roughly the same year over year in Q4. So that means that sales per click basically declined by about 8% as well. And so I think moving forward, we should really expect this to be the case more often than not, that the ad pricing trends we see should be more reflective of the value of those ad clicks. And what we observed over the course of 2020 and 2021 and even parts of 2022, I think was just the nature of kind of that shock of the early days of the pandemic affecting the competitiveness of ad auctions, and then finally kind of coming to a more of a equilibrium here in the back half of 2022. Now, that said, there are still some situations where ad pricing is still seeing some very interesting trends. And as an example of that, I'll look over to Walmart sponsored products, which, similar to Amazon sponsored products, you just pay to promote your products directly in Walmart search results. And as you can see from the chart on the left, our cost per click on Walmart was down more than 50% year over year for each of the last 2 quarters of the year. And at the same time, we really saw return on ad spend on Walmart sponsored products soar relative to earlier in the year, peaking at more than 3 times of the April level in November. And the big story here is that Walmart switched from a first price ad auction to a second price ad auction. And what that means is that they went from charging advertisers the full freight of the bid placed to only charging them just enough to beat the advertiser directly below them in ad auctions. And so that really allowed advertisers to spend a lot less on clicks for those ad auctions where there might not have been competitors very near to them in terms of beating out bids. And so that's helped improve ROAS pretty significantly for Walmart advertisers. So again, while we are kind of drifting into more of an equilibrium now in terms of how ad pricing is moving in a lot of different platforms, there are still nuances to each platform, and you'll want to look out for that, particularly in up and coming platforms like Walmart, where they're rolling out changes regularly. Next, I want to move on to a topic that I'm sure no one on the call is ignorant of, which is inflationary impact on product prices. As you can see from the chart here, that those product price inflation numbers have had an impact on average order value for Google search advertisers at Tenuity. Back in 2021, throughout essentially the entire core holiday shopping period from early November through late December, we saw double-digit average order value growth year over year. That slowed quite a bit in 2022 to just mid to low single digits for most of those periods, as product price inflation has slowed down, and so we expect average order value to kind of continue to or average order value growth to be more muted moving forward. But that said, it does depend pretty heavily on product category. If you take a look at this chart, you can see that categories like apparel and sports and recreation saw flat to negative average order value growth, and these are definitely product categories where some brands have it's particularly in 2022 ended up with inventory that might not have been receiving as much demand as they may have anticipated, and so there were some discounts in effect there. And then on the other side of the coin, there are also categories like automotive and beauty that were still seeing double-digit average order value growth in Q4. And so, again, it's going to depend on what product category you're in and what the demand looks like for that product, and a host of different other factors. But we do expect for average order value growth to kind of continue to slow down here, moving into the rest of 2023. And that kind of brings me to the next section, which I'd like to dive a little bit further into holiday season insights. I started touching on this in the last section, but obviously, I think product price inflation was top of mind for a lot of consumers heading into the holiday shopping season. And so, we at Tenuity surveyed over 1,000 U.S. holiday shoppers in September of last year to get a sense for what was going to be top of mind for them as they made purchases throughout the holiday shopping season, and asking just directly how do we expect product price inflation to impact holiday shopping. Only 8% said that product price inflation wouldn't have any impact. 50% of shoppers said they'd shop around more. 36% expected to buy different types of gifts. 32% cited fewer gifts. 26% said they'd buy cheaper brands. So a lot of folks expected product price inflation to impact them in a number of different ways. And I think this also kind of manifested itself in an answer to a different question, which asked respondents to rank, different variables in terms of how important they were to making holiday purchase decisions. And the number one answer, with 50% of number one rankings, was price, followed by sales or discounts with 22%. So over 70% of the folks we surveyed said that either price or sales or discounts were going to be the most important factor in determining what types of purchases they were going to be making this holiday shopping season, which makes sense, given how much more expensive things we're getting, particularly in 2022 with inflation. And so we actually saw this manifest itself in the holiday shopping season in paid search results across both Google and Amazon. And if you take a look at the chart on this slide, you can see that our sales attributed to ads on both retail Google search ads and Amazon sponsored product ads was the strongest for the period between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday. And obviously retailers have made a lot of efforts to really pull demand earlier in the Q4 holiday shopping season. I think in 2022, there's probably no better example than Amazon itself, where they tried or they did run a Prime Early Access sale in mid-October to try to kind of juice those early Q4 numbers. And while we did see, sales kind of lag in the days immediately before the Prime Early Access sale and the days immediately after, it didn't really seem to be, a longer term effect than that. And so, while retailers are probably going to continue to make these efforts to pull demand earlier in Q4, it's still the case that consumers have been conditioned over the last couple of decades to expect the best, opportunities for good prices and good discounts on key days like Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so, in terms of what that means for 2023, I think obviously consumers are still a bit tepid. There's still a lot of concern in the air, even if there are strong economic indicators like low unemployment and good news on some fronts like that. Consumers are still a little cautious right now, but I think when it comes to 2023, I think they're still going to be looking to those big sales holidays to make purchases. And so thinking ahead to time periods like Memorial Day or Labor Day, I think those are still going to be really good opportunities to get in front of consumers this year. And that's and just make sure that you if those are big days for you historically, that you continue to lean into them, as it does appear that sales holidays are still a big deal for consumers, particularly in this time of product price inflation. And so with that, I'd like to shift more into kind of a paid search specific topic where, obviously I'm sure everyone on this call has heard of Performance Max campaigns, which are the latest Google black box tool. Obviously, those campaign types can be used for lead generation, but zooming in on Google Shopping advertisers who use it to promote products, we've actually seen the adoption of Performance Max campaigns now top the peak adoption of Smart Shopping for Tenuity retail advertisers. Smart Shopping topped out at about 75% of all of our advertisers using it to some extent to target Google Shopping inventory, while Performance Max is now up to 80% adoption. So we've seen pretty strong adoption across Tenuity advertisers. And looking at the performance so far at top level, how it's doing compared to standard shopping, just looking at cost per click, fairly similar cost per click, about 3% lower on Performance Max campaigns than standard shopping campaigns in Q4. Sales per click, a little bit bigger disparity, about 6% lower on Performance Max than standard shopping campaigns in Q4. But by and large, return on ad spend a little bit lower on Performance Max, but a fairly small difference in the big scheme of things. And so overall, we'd probably say that the transition has gone fairly smoothly in terms of how Performance Max has performed so far. Now, obviously, these are just top-level numbers, and within each advertiser's account, you're going to need to dig into what kinds of customers you're attracting. Obviously, you might need to use those campaign settings to mostly target new customers if you feel like Performance Max is really just retargeting your existing customers and not really producing as much incremental value. Might also need to reach out to your Google reps and get brand negatives added if it feels like they're really just eating up brand search. But again, big scheme of things, top level across 100 plus advertisers spending more than $1 billion annually in ad spend on Google. performance has been pretty decent compared to standard shopping, and I'd say the rollout has been pretty smooth so far. Now, in terms of one key thing we're looking at as we head further into 2023 and are keeping an eye on, I think an important factor of how this whole thing unfolds is going to be whether or not we should expect to see more non-shopping inventory in the future. Now, as of right now, only about 18% of our Performance Max campaign spend goes to non-shopping inventory, but that was a bit up from Q3. And so, because Google rolled this campaign type out as mandatory immediately before the busy Q4 holiday shopping season, it makes sense that if they were expecting to really expand the reach to a bunch of non-shopping inventory, they might slow play it a bit as to keep folks spending on this key campaign type during the Q4 holiday shopping season. So I do think there's the potential that we'll see this continue to expand. It wouldn't be the first time that a Google update took some time to really manifest itself and fully encapsulate what Google intends to do it for. But again, just something we're going to be keeping an eye on, and I think this will be an important factor in the ultimate performance we end up seeing from Performance Max compared to standard shopping or smart shopping before it. And so with that, I want to move on to what I would say is maybe the most topical area in our industry right now, which is the AI search impact. And I think this technically, I think a lot of the updates I'm going to talk about here more happened in Q1, but it certainly started in Q4, with the rollout of ChatGPT and folks really starting to lean into the use cases for, AI-powered chatbots. And so this has then, obviously led to big headlines in Q1 2023, like Microsoft thinks AI can be Google at search. AI is coming for your browser, your social media, and your operating system too. Some really big claims, and certainly, it has a lot of people in our industry thinking that this is really going to be a big turning point in how things work when it comes to search. You've got big players like Omnicom sending letters to all their clients saying things like conversational AI is likely to become the dominant way consumers search on the internet. And so, it definitely has the potential to shake things up. But, when I see claims like, AI is going to become the dominant way consumers search on the internet, or headlines like Microsoft is going to eat Google, or things like that, I can't help but think back to very similar conversations that we had years ago when it came to voice search. And if you don't believe me, this is a headline from nearly a decade ago, where inside Baidu's plan to beat Google by taking search out of the text era. And inside that Fast Company article, a Baidu exec made the claim that in 5 years' time, remember this is in 2014, in 5 years' time, at least 50% of all searches are going to be either through images or speech. And so we're now nearly a decade past that prediction, and it's still nowhere near the case that more than 50% of searches are through images or speech. And so, you know, back when voice search was a huge topic of conversation, I really dug into the numbers at that time and published some stuff on Search Engine Land around why I didn't really think voice search was going to be as big of an impact to most advertisers as it was kind of made out to be by obviously some sources like Baidu, who were looking to compete with Google. And the big reason back then was that we really just didn't see much of a change to the types of queries that were driving our paid and organic search results. At the time, it was at Merkle RKG, so these numbers are based on their client set. But just in terms of like the percentage of queries that had question words, or the length of queries based on character count, or the length of queries based on the number of words, we really just never saw much of a shift there. And so part of the reason I think that is that I don't think voice search actually ended up being that different from typed search in terms of what folks actually said relative to what they were trying to obtain. But I think an even bigger reason had to do with the fact that voice search was just never really used for as many of the types of things that are relevant to most advertisers and businesses as text search. And so I think to this point, this is one of the first studies that Google released way back, I believe in 2015 or 2014, where they broke out how many, like what percentage of different demographic groups like teens and adults were using voice interactions with their devices to accomplish different things. And the first thing that should pop out to you on this is that almost none of these actions have anything to do with what most brands or advertisers really care about. Obviously, telling your device to call mom or to play a song or to check the time, these were never really super important queries for most advertisers and brands. And so I think when it comes to AI chatbots, the key question this year, as I'm sure we're going to see research come out in terms of the percentage of people using it, and all of that good stuff. But I think the key question is, what types of interactions are humans really going to be having with AI search? It's certainly possible that it's going to revolutionize how everyone interacts in every type of scenario. But I'm leaning more towards the thought that when it comes to searches like mahogany side table, I don't think you're going to be seeing a whole lot of consumers wanting to chat with the bot about mahogany side tables. And I don't think that's even as good of an experience as being taken to a rich search results page that has product prices and product images, and you can sort by price or expand to just go to the full shopping results, or you can click on specific retailer links. Like, that's a very helpful experience, whereas I just don't think something like a chatbot would actually be more useful in that scenario. And it's certainly possible that I am entirely wrong. You'll find people within my own company who don't agree with me. So definitely not an end all be all argument, but I feel like whenever topics like this come up, half the fun is throwing your hat in the ring in terms of what you think might come of it. And right now, I kind of see it as voice search 2.0, where yes, it's going to have an incremental impact in terms of how people interact with their devices. Obviously, writing essays on The Great Gatsby just got a whole lot easier for folks, even if they are developing tools to help detect the use of AI chatbots and that kind of stuff. But big scheme of things, I think in the immediate future, my prediction is that it won't have a huge impact on how most of us do business. And so with that, I'd like to thank you guys so much for the time.